The body's very intelligent, so it develops new ways of telling you things.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Karen, good morning from Australia and welcome to the Ultrahabits show. I've had some drama with the baby early morning. You've had some drama with time zone differences with myself, but we have made it and we are truly, truly grateful to have you here on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, good to meet you. Well, we'll see what unfolds in the next little while.
Yeah. Look, I came across you through one of Stephen Kotler's articles. I think, I'm a big Stephen Kotler fan. I like his material. It's kind of out there. It's a bit weird. It's all things high performance. And it really caught my eye. And I dove into your story and wanted the opportunity to unpack some of the gems here on the show. So, for those that don't know you, I guess we can sum you up as really an adventure athlete, someone that really pushes yourself beyond the limits. And we're going to get into what that actually means, but we're going to go back into your history. So as I understand it, you were a pretty keen runner, a climber, an orienteer, but something happened in your life when you were 21 years old that really shifted and changed the trajectory for you. Can you unpack with us what actually happened when you were 21 years old?
So yeah, when I was that age, as you said, I was into being outdoors really and in whatever way possible, but particularly with a passion for climbing and orienteering, running in the mountains. But I had a rock climbing accident at age 21 and fell from a cliff in Scotland. I was leading the climb, which means you're the first person up it. And yeah, when I look back at it, I realized I should have backed down. My body was screaming at me, or my intuition was screaming at me to come down. But I was so headstrong and continue to be. But I think over the years I've gradually developed a bit more connection with my instinct and to listen at a different level that I couldn't then. But yeah, I just kept on pushing and climbing and reached a point that I couldn't hold on anymore. It was beyond my ability and fell off and woke up 3 or 4 days later in hospital intensive care to learn that I was paralyzed and really just starting a whole new life. So I'm paralyzed completely from the chest down, so below kind of armpit level. I don't have any movement or sensation. And I have gone through various periods in life where I've tried to challenge that as well and spent 4 or 5 hours a day pedaling a bike to represent the gait of walking, pedaling with your arms and it moves your legs and try and stimulate my nervous system and kind of investigated all sorts of ways. But I like to explore. I guess that's a good summary.
It's really interesting because quite timely, we have a local ultra marathoner here in Australia. I'm connected with him and his wife on Facebook. His name just doesn't come to mind. And he's recently become paralyzed as well. And he's documenting the journey in the hospital in a real kind of full-on way, right? Like kind of like the food, his bodily functions, everything that's really happening. And I think what he's doing is he's obviously trying to express himself and find a new way to, I think, channel purpose, or I can feel like he's curating his journey in a way to start to find meaning in it for himself. And so, you talk about you actually said that you'd rather be dead than paralyzed. And you soon learned that with friends, creativity and perseverance, that you could achieve anything. Like, what shifted your mindset during that process? Like, what got you from, oh my God, I'd rather be dead, to, oh shit, I think I can still achieve and be who I am?
Yeah, so at the time it wasn't as radical as that. Although there were a couple of incidents that were fairly profound in shifting my mindset. One of them was a very simple thing. A woman in the hospital who couldn't move anything. Or she could, no, that's not true. She could move her arms a little bit, but she didn't have any dexterity in her hands. She'd broken her neck, so she was paralyzed from the neck down, which had affected a lot of her arm and hand function as well. And so I think when you're surrounded by people in more difficult positions than yourself, it's really easy to start to reframe your own situation and go, well, actually, I might think this is terrible, but there's levels and I can still do things. And she spent 6 months trying to peel a banana, and one day there was this big celebration in the hospital because she'd managed to peel a banana. So I guess that was a moment when you go, okay, maybe I don't need to feel quite so bad about my scenario here, you know, with determination, with consistency, with effort, with friends, with the function that I've got, which is much more than some people have. I really can focus on what I can do instead of what I can't do. So that helped. And then 3 months after my accident, a very close friend died in a climbing accident. He hadn't been for 3 months because of what had happened with me. And so I think that was another incident that made me reframe my own situation and go, hey, I'm alive and I have to make the most of this life. So, you know, there's lots of stuff written and about the impact of trauma or difficult life events, that when these things happen to us, not just becoming paralyzed, but all kinds of things, from health problems to losing somebody you love, or any big challenge that can trigger this kind of insightful process for us, this more introspective process, is asking the bigger questions about meaning and purpose, is actually, I think, an incredible opportunity to wake up from a bit of being a bit unconscious about what we're doing and why we're doing it or how we're doing things, and to really allow us to start to ask these bigger questions and explore deeper within, and I guess kind of spark that inner journey as much as the outer journey of life. So even though those were my words the night before I was paralyzed, and I still wouldn't choose or wish for anybody to be paralyzed, it comes with lots of challenges, but at the same time it also comes with a different perspective on life. And I don't think there's anything bad about that when we get different insights and different perspectives, whether that's through having a disability or living in a different culture. You know, there's so many ways that we can shift how we view the world, and becoming paralyzed for me was clearly a big one.
Were you introspective before the accident, or were you just like very kind of adventure driven, like it was just kind of this existential challenge, or were you already an introspective person?
I never, I think I was too young to really know myself. So it's what I was kind of that age where I don't really know whether I was introspective or not, or how that related to where other people were. But when I look back at my teenage years, right through high school, I always felt like I probably didn't really conform to the mainstream. I didn't really want to go drinking, and I mean, I did because I wanted to fit in, but I'd often just felt like that wasn't for me. So I suppose that's like any teenager. We're finding ourselves, we're getting to know ourselves, and so I'm not sure if I really could comment on who I was then. But yeah, I mean, introspection has definitely become a big part of me. Reflection, considering why and what and how, but I think most people that meet me probably think I'm just, and I am very action orientated as well. So I think the introspective part of me is going on all the time, but I don't let it doesn't seem to get in the way of moving.
And sometimes the moving helps the introspection evolve too, doesn't it? Right? Like you kind of...
I think that depends who you are. Certainly for me, my introspective process, and Stephen Kotler talks about this, the pattern recognition. For me, it's really helped when I'm moving my body, obviously not in a forceful way where you're really going full hard on some training intervals, but for me, going for a bike ride is a way of waking up that part of my brain that kind of logical thinking doesn't wake up, and I have all sorts of insights and reflections when I'm doing something like that, especially being in nature and outside. Yeah.
There's a lot in that, and I completely agree with you. So when you're going through this kind of transformation in the way that you were now going to have to face life, particularly in those early days, what were some of the habits that you started to develop that really helped you kind of face the way that you were now forced to live life? Like effectively, you're now paralyzed. You're going to have to deal with it. Like, just, was there any kind of routine, or was there any kind of consistency, and what did that look like that really enabled you to start to kind of just deal with what was in front of you?
Mm-hmm. I think the main thing that I did, and at the time I was young, so a lot of this was done without any knowledge or wisdom
Yeah.
of that's out there right now. But I think I kind of created boundaries around things. So my grieving process and the emotions that I needed to feel, I did that in my flat, mainly on my own. And my curtain closing and opening was my trigger for that. So when my curtains were closed and it was dark, then it's like, okay, now I can do what I need to do to feel what I'm feeling and grieve and cry and have that experience and I think, process that. And then in the morning when I opened my curtains, it was like a trigger to me. Okay, get on with it. And it was kind of a fake it till you make it approach. And so I don't, to a degree, I fake it until you make it was kind of what got me through, but I don't agree with that entirely. I think you really need to be connecting with what's authentic and true and not faking things. But I think when there's something that tough, we can't, I don't know if wallowing in pity and feeling, just accentuating all of the negative thoughts about it is helpful. So I had this process of just creating some boundaries to allow myself the grieving process and to what the Flow Research Collective and Stephen talks about is the grit, but just digging in, trying to be the best of yourself even when you feel terrible, trying to think the best thoughts and reframe them even when bad ones are coming up. And I guess in the process I really discovered that our mind is super malleable and all that neuroplasticity that we had that I never even knew what that was back then. I guess I just worked with it to reframe everything. And I think that's become a natural skill that maybe until recent years I hadn't really realized, is that maybe because every single day presents all these challenges, the world is not designed for wheels. You turn up places as flights of steps. You've forgotten to tell somebody because it's just your life and it's how it is. I mean, literally every day is a constant string of challenges, especially if you're not just in your own little zone and in your own little home and comfort zone, which I rarely am. So it's become, I think I've just trained my brain to become super, super good at reframing every situation and just seeing possibilities and ways around things, which I realize now is actually, it's become a gift and maybe a kind of superpower. But it is something that my circumstances have helped train, I think.
There's something in that. I do believe it's a superpower. And I think that the way that we frame events and the way that we perceive is really, how we perceive and how we frame the world is our world, right? And, like the ability to shift that and create a new lens is something that is of real interest for anyone. And it's like, well, how do you do that without necessarily having to get paralyzed, right? Like, how do you start to develop and evolve that sense of gratitude and create that new baseline for the reframe without actually having to go through the trauma? And I don't know if that's possible, but I think that's really interesting and something that the audience needs to consider the next time they, go get a coffee and it's cold and they get pissed off or whatever the hell the incident might be, right? You said something earlier, and I think I want to go there and park there for a minute. This whole piece on compartmentalization, because that's what you're talking about. You're saying that you're kind of, this is, you got through it through creating a time and place to suffer or to grieve and then to kind of move on. And you did say that, and I agree with you that sometimes we just have to get shit done, move as, but we also have to know how to sit with ourselves. How do you, and this may be a difficult question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. How do you know when it's time to sit with something and you've been sitting with it too long and you need to now act? Like, where's that line? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it intuitive? Or, because I do agree with you, like, we can't just continue to fake it till we make it, but you got to act and you got to move. And, the way through shifting through emotions is action, but you also need to sit and process it. For you, how do you know when that line is drawn?
I suppose over the years I've got more, you know, you become more aware of what your what a kind of good balanced baseline emotional state is for yourself. So I know fairly quickly now when things are not where they should be or could be. Should be is the wrong word, but where I would like them to be, you know, where I'd like to. So if I'm pushing through something, I might notice that I'm just more anxious, or I'm just feeling a bit more pressured, or like the subtlety of it changes. And as soon as I see that, I'm like, there's something in me that needs to come out. I don't know what it is. Like there's something that's not sitting right with me. And sometimes that might relate to a specific practical thing, like a conversation or an issue that you've got going on that needs to be resolved, or I need to think about it or decide what action to take to, or not to take to shift that. And other times it's something that's much more internal. It's like, well, I don't know what's going on inside me, but there's something there that I can feel it. It's like affects my nervous system, or it affects, you know, it has that physical impact. And I think that's taken me many years to get attuned to that. So now if I become aware that something's just not quite right, I'm not in, for me, when there's not something really, when there's not a kind of struggle or challenge going on, I feel a sense of peace and more naturally feel spontaneous positive emotions and things. And so when that baseline starts to shift and change, I kind of get aware of it, and then I'm like, okay, what's this about? And then I try and sit with it. And when I say sit with it, I don't sit in silence. I have kind of practices that I use, I guess a bit more energetic, or kind of listening to my body, and I might listen to music or gently move my body, or just find a process to really connect with my body and feel where I'm feeling something, and then it seems to unravel itself.
That's interesting. Just wondering what it would be like to have emotional stuff come up as you would, without the lack of sensation necessarily, right? Because you don't necessarily have sensation everywhere, do you? Physical sensation.
No, I'm paralyzed from the chest down, but you know, the body's very intelligent, so it develops new ways of telling you things. I mean, not everything. Like I can I've got horrendous scars on my body where I've burned myself and had no idea that I was physically burning myself.
Wow.
But I also get kind of physical sensations sometimes happen when something's wrong, but they're different from what they would be for you. But if it's emotional, it's like much less low. For something physical is very localized, isn't it? And it's like the pain response, and that maybe doesn't work. But if there's something emotional, it's much more holistic, I think. So you feel it in your nervous system. I'll notice that I'm clenching my jaw more, or I'm just feeling maybe a bit like my heart's just not quite as steady as it should be. Or so just like you, or just like anybody else, I have ways to sense when something's affecting me.
Do you feel you've become more in tune with that because of the, you know, like someone that might be deaf has kind of extra sensory senses in other areas or whatever? Like, do you feel like you've had to?
I can't really answer that question because I don't know what it's like not to be paralyzed for 30 years now. So
Yeah,
I don't know what I would be tuned into or not. I mean, how much of this is just a life process where we become just a little bit more savvy or able to understand ourselves or read ourselves and hear signals, and how much of it's because I am paralyzed? I don't know the answer, but what I suppose I do know is that being paralyzed because you're missing a lot of function, I have like another sense. It's like another level of awareness that you wouldn't have. So I've got like an awareness of, I always know what I'm sitting on, and I'm conscious of not getting a pressure sore. So it's almost like you develop another level of awareness for what you're wearing, what you're sitting on, what your catheter's doing. Like there's this whole kind of other level of awareness that I need to have to be able to stay safe and look after my body, but because it doesn't get the signals normally. And maybe that level of awareness has developed other levels of awareness. I don't know. It's
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and maybe it's inhibited them. I don't know.
Well, now your baseline shifted, so you don't know how you, yeah, like it's such a long time ago. It's difficult to, I suppose, to compare, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you wrote something, there was something in your website that I really, really liked. You said you live life as a modern day alchemist. You're kind of passionate about turning challenges and opportunity, transforming the difficult stuff into gold. I think that's a big statement. I love that statement. Is there an intuitive process that you know, just reflecting upon, go through when you're viewing, like, you know, you're in front of a very difficult situation?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had commenced down that, you know, we were talking about the way that you reframe things, but like just reflecting on how you face something extremely challenging. Do you have an intuitive process that,
You know what?
yeah,
Sorry, I cut you off there.
no, all good, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
I suppose what I've realized is that, yes, I've developed all these intuitive processes. And in the last couple of years, where I've been researching some of the theory that's out there, and part of that's been via Stephen Kotler's work and the Flow Research Collective and others in other areas, I've realized that all my intuitive processes, I've now got names and theories and research that proves them. And I go, oh, that's what I've been doing for years. Oh, that's interesting to know there's a study being done that looks at that. So, for example, you know, Socratic questioning, and how can I challenge these assumptions? What's a different perspective on it? All the different views that you can take by asking questions. There are more modern versions of that. There's a process called access consciousness, which is something I ended up accidentally kind of doing some training in. But essentially, it's all about connecting the body by touching the body in certain places, but asking questions. And the whole basis is, what if you always ask a question? What if, you know, when you ask a question, you open up doors and you open up insights and you open up possibilities. And if you're not asking questions, then quite often you're closing things down and you're being defined by something. So I realize that these things are now actual processes and they have labels and names. But for years, I would do these things, just be like, okay, how could I see this differently? What might I learn through this? What might the advantage of this be? What new insight or discovery or exploration am I going to make through this? Years ago, I did a master's in development training, and through that process came across the hero's journey. And, you know, you just go, okay, well, I'm going to meet guides and I'm going to meet dragons, and there are going to be challenges, but I'm always going to find something. And I suppose that parallels spiritual views of life as a journey that's just full of struggle and challenges. But, you know, that's what life's about, because through those processes we develop new consciousness and perspectives and so on. So yes, I've got intuitive processes that I use, and I think they've all been identified by other people and research and given names and labels and theories. So, but I didn't know about them in that process.
What's your relationship to curiosity?
Well, I've just been preparing a presentation this evening about curiosity. And,
really? Wow.
Recently did a little a podcast, but it's not on public access about it. So yeah, I mean, massive. Yeah, I mean, essentially that's what I've just talked about. Is kind of connected to that Socratic idea and the asking a question. So, and I think I probably first came across that in a really, really action-orientated way while skiing across the Greenland ice cap in a sit ski, and it was super, super tough. I wasn't an athlete at the time. I was doing an office job. I was a geologist, and I elected to take a month and ski across the Greenland ice cap. But basically, I trained for it. But, you know, nothing can prepare you for going from 8 hours in an office to 10 hours of skiing every day. So I was in a lot of pain. My hands wouldn't open. My tendons were all tight. And I just started on that journey. You're on your own. I wasn't on my own. I was in a group, but you can't really speak to each other. You're skiing in a straight line. So for very much sort of 10 hours a day, you're in your own thoughts. And it was like, okay, I could have a really miserable time if I just keep focusing and thinking about all the pain I'm in and how difficult this is and what could go wrong and we might die and all these kind of things that I was thinking. And it triggered me into this big process of curiosity, and it just freed me. So I call it the freedom of curiosity. So by just going, this is interesting, I've never felt this bad before, I wonder what will happen next, is freeing, because suddenly you've got interest in the future, or the possibility of what could unfold, whatever that might be. And there are studies done on it. There was a study I came across recently at a university in California somewhere, and they used students and asked them various questions and then measured their brain patterns and waves whilst they were following this process. Some of the questions were very, opening up curiosity, and other students weren't following that process. And the difference in the brain waves and the neurochemicals that were released really illustrated that curiosity actually lights up the brain, and it enables us to feel better. It releases neurochemicals that help us feel good. And so in feeling good, curiosity is good for us because it actually gets us in a better mental state to tackle things as well.
Yeah, I'm an ultra runner. The next time I'm in the pain cave, I'm gonna do that instead of trying to shout at myself to push through it or play kind of other mental games. I think what I'll do is just start to kind of use that Socratic line of questioning and leveraging that curiosity out there, because I think that's a really good way of kind of reframing where you are.
It doesn't work for everything. I think it's a great process for most things, but there's other levels then that I have to go to. So, for example, last week I was training for an expedition to Antarctica. We were in Norway on an ice cap. One of my huge challenges is bladder management, catheters, and you have so many layers of clothes on. It's so easy for something to go wrong. And so I was like really living in alertness of this, and I'd planned all these things to make sure nothing did go wrong. And then I woke up one morning and I'd wet myself, and that meant the sleeping bag was wet. It's a down sleeping bag. You're in the middle of an ice cap. You're out there for weeks. What do you do about that? You can't wash it. You've only got so many changes of clothes you can bring with you. And I was like, I really got into a bit of a down space for a little while, going, I am out of my depth here. And then I was like, stop going down the negative route. Start asking, what do you need to do to make this possible? What do you need to do to make this safer? And then I use a process which I did come across in a book about confidence called Cats and Ants. So cats is capability affirming thoughts, and ants is automatic negative thoughts. And I've just started, since I got back from Norway, I'm listing all of the problems I can see, all of the negative thoughts I'm having, the fears and the worries. And then it's like, okay, what do I need to do to make myself feel better about that, or to practically improve that situation? So now, with that week of space since getting back from the ice, I've got an action plan of things I need to do to reduce that risk, and basically risk management, but it's just through asking questions and noticing where the fear and the worry is cropping up, and then asking what do we need to do to solve this.
What a process. I mean, because for you, your expeditions, like, do you have to have support out there? Like, how does that work given kind of the circumstances that you're in? Like,
most of the expeditions I've done, I don't do on my own. Like cycling, I have done cycling things on my own because I can manage that alone. But again, that would get challenging if you're kind of in the middle of nowhere and there's buildings with steps. So I'm not that interested in doing things on my own anyway. Like, I like my own space, but to me, part of the adventure of these things is actually the external dynamics of who you meet and the things that you learn, but also the internal dynamics of the people that you're with, and the intense sharing of the journey and the discovery that you're going through together. So luckily, I'm not that interested in doing these things on my own.
You're you're not that much of an introvert.
No, but I prefer doing these things with people, but in a together way, so that you kind of have it, and in a way that's as together as possible with the environment that we're traveling through. So I would rather not have support vehicles or luxury hotels waiting. I like to be fairly self-supporting, as in, within the team, and then to see what unfolds and who we meet and what we discover and what side adventures come off the main one. And that's a big part of it for me. So it's not really about having I think some people think I've got some big, like, amazing money machine behind me and some big support crew and a big van that I might sleep. It's none of that. It's literally just me and a mate and a trailer and a tent in it, and you set off and you see what happens, and you eat porridge at the roadside type of adventures.
That's amazing. So you, I'm going to go back in time. So when you, you got paralyzed, and you then moved towards, becoming a full-time athlete, right? For a decade, the Paralympics, 2012, 2016, like, what was that journey from being paralyzed in the hospital to becoming a Paralympian? Like, could you walk us through that process? Like, what happened?
It was,
Like, how did
it was very unexpected. There was a massive gap. I never planned on it. I think a lot of people find themselves in Paralympic sport fairly quickly post-accident because it becomes a positive focus, and you kind of identify with your body and it makes you feel better, and maybe it's a good distraction from all of the pain and heartache of what you're going through. For me, it was completely topsy-turvy. I didn't come to Paralympic sport until the idea came up in 2008 when I was watching the Beijing Paralympics. So I was paralyzed in 1990. I've even forgotten the year. 93, I think it was.
Okay,
so, yeah, we're talking, a good 15 years or more down the line. So for me, it stemmed from a passion for cycling. And when I saw that hand cycling had finally become a Paralympic sport, it was the first time it was in Beijing, and I knew the next Olympics was in London. Literally, it started with a question. Or a feeling. It was like, wow, I wonder if I could get to take part in an Olympics in my own country. Wouldn't it be amazing to see if that was possible? And so that's how it began. And I was terrible. I did 2 races. I was last in them both. There was no finish line. I was, took myself to the national championships and was lapped multiple times by another British hand cyclist who'd won a gold in Beijing. And it just the odds just looked absolutely terrible. But I guess I just kept asking those questions, like, how do you get to be better? And it's only the curiosity process that's enabled me to stay in Olympic sport for so long. Because in truth, the competitive process, I've never been led by any ideas that winning a medal will make me a better person or make me feel better or be the solution to anything. It's just like I've just been led by a love of what I do, and then this curiosity to figure out how you get to be better at something, or how you can tweak things to make improvements, and ask those questions.
What were you doing in the form of athletic endeavor or climbing? Like, you were obviously physically active for those 15 years? Like, you were still doing what you're doing now or not? Like, what were you...
I had various adventures. Every few years I would kind of just be called on an adventure. So hand cycled across the Himalayas various times in different parts of the Himalayas, from Pakistan and India, Tibet. Sea kayaked from Vancouver to Alaska over 3 months. I had a proper job through all of this time, but they were a very generous employer, and they kept giving me unpaid leave to go off and have these pretty incredible adventures. So I mean, I wasn't like a full-on crazy training athlete every day. I enjoyed going for bike rides. I went to the gym when I could. I swam when I could. I just did things to keep a fairly decent base level of fitness, but I didn't know anything about proper training or how to structure it. And actually now it's interesting, at the other end of the spectrum, coming out of Paralympic competition, it's funny, isn't it? We can't change who we've become, and we can't unlearn what we've learned. But sometimes I think there's just so much incredibly great stuff in naivety and lack of experience, as well as, there's a lot of great stuff that comes at the other end of the spectrum when we've got lots of experience and knowledge. But I'm almost now trying to unravel how do I integrate this life of 15 years of high performance sport and somehow balance a more, a life that I want, that's sustainable and happy and holistic and all those things, breaking some habits.
So what you're saying is that, can you break that down? So what are the things that you wish you were more naive about?
Maybe everything, because I think in some way, I don't know, I don't know the answers. I'm exploring this with you now. I think with naivety, there's there's less expectation, there's less fear, there's less judgment. There's just this open space of, oh, that, that's the kind of naivety of youth, and maybe part of the vigor of youth, where you can just go into things with less worries, less concerns, less history, less frameworks to start to put things in. So I suppose as I go through life now, and we or as any of us go through life, and we accumulate experiences, and some of them are good and some of them are bad, or maybe they're not good or bad, but they've been maybe more difficult or more fun. I think there's still something very precious in arriving fresh to something with just that absolute open eyes, open-hearted wonder at what might unfold. And it's been interesting, actually, in recent years. Some of the adventures I've taken I seem to rarely do things with people who are experts. I like the co-discovery, and I've been doing things with people, for example, who've never ridden a bike in their whole life, or they've only maybe ridden one as a kid and they've never ridden since they were 5 years old. And then I see the world through their eyes again, and I see their wonder at going into a different culture. A couple of friends in Scotland, they'd never done anything like that, and we rode the length of the Ganges from its source in the Himalayas to its Sacred Heart in Varanasi, and it was incredible to share that journey with them, because it was like all the people that were coming to us and curious. It was just this heart-opening, mind-opening experience, because I was seeing it like in a fresh way through their eyes.
I can go ahead.
There you go.
No, go ahead. No, I could completely relate to that. I think over time you develop this kind of performance orientation that actually creates limits, because it's just like the trap of the performance gear, and the feedback that's coming from your watch and your heart rate. Like, it's all this stuff like becomes kind of limitations to doing shit with freedom. And I suppose that open eyes and wonder. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. And I'm always saying things I probably shouldn't say, but as part of my journey with the Flow Research Collective and coaching, there's so many people that, and clearly feedback is a valuable mechanism to, when we get feedback, we can track our progress, and that gives us motivation, and that keeps us going. And there's been times in my Paralympic life when that's been fundamental as part of my motivational process to see that progress. And I really believe it is. But there's also times when I think data and progress and pressure is like, whoa. And I'm definitely in a space at the moment where I've done that for years. Actually, I kind of want to try and unravel some of those patterns and habits to allow myself to be more and enter the spaces of that we're talking about, where you've got less performance pressure.
Do you think flow is better or more accessible in play, full performance versus performance, or either way? Like, do you think that it's easier to kind of achieve a state of flow when you're not dealing with, or you're not aware of kind of this artificial sense of performance, right? Like, where you're just kind of, it's more play and fun. And
actually,
do you have a view on it?
I had a very interesting interview yesterday with a student who's studying flow, and she asked a not dissimilar question. She's like, do you think your flow is better in a performance environment, like the competitive sports environment, for example, or maybe on your adventures where you just relaxed and there's not so much of a big goal? And I would say I experienced flow in both, and I don't think they're comparable. They're different. They're different. They've got different qualities. I think the flow that I experience when I'm in a more relaxed environment, so it's not like performance focused, is it's usually like longer in duration, and it's more like a macro flow experience. and it feels connected to, it's usually comes with senses of awe and nature connection and something much kind of deeper and more spiritual almost. And then I experience, like with the competition environment or performance environment, like work, where you've got a deadline and you go, okay, I'm going to give myself 2 hours to go deep in flow on this thing. it's a different kind of flow. It's present, it's immersive, it's cool, but it's kind of mini.
Yeah. I find what impacts flow, particularly in what I do with the running, is the external reality that someone's racing against you, right? Like, so like you kind of, for me, it's easier when I'm on my own, I find, because I'm not worried about external events as such. When you see kind of people running by you, or you feel like you become aware of this competitive process, for me, that's a major distraction, because I have to be more aware of the external stimuli, right? Versus being in my internal process. So I think I completely agree with you. When you're kind of only focused on your internal processes because you're playing or having fun, there would be more of a macro feel to it, because you don't have to come in and out of it. Like, you know, so I think I definitely get where you're coming from. So I think this has been brilliant. I think the real gems here around curiosity, introspection, has been phenomenal in terms of what the audience can reflect on within their own systems and processes. So yeah, that's been really, really, really great to unpack that piece.
Maybe just to wrap up that piece on the kind of performance flow, because I did experience it obviously on various occasions, and a really profound one was in the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. So I won the gold medal there. So many things had gone wrong. There were so many reasons why I should have been distracted, stressed. I injured my shoulder on the way to Rio. There was all this potential pressure to win the gold. But then I realized I'd practiced for so many years, just getting into, you just said, like, being on your own without the distraction. I practiced that enough that I could do that, even though there were other people, if that makes sense. So my teammates and the British cycling team staff started to say, God, you're just like in another world when we're at a big race. I'd turn up, I'd have my headphones on, I'd be listening to music, I'd warm up to a playlist before the race. But it's just like I'd be away somewhere, like undistracted by anything and anybody. And they were like, we don't want to talk to you. Like, we don't talk to you. You're almost a bit scary when you're in that place. I don't think they meant scary, but I think I was just so in a zone that was free of distraction that it enabled me to have some pretty incredible flow experiences in that competition environment. But I think it took training to not be distracted, if you know what I mean, to take that focus internally.
So do you think it's a time thing then? Like, it's just like repetition practice that gets you there?
I think it does. I think it does. And now transferring over into more work things, if I want to create a presentation or do a piece of writing, there's rarely just like doing a hard training session, there's rarely a moment when you get out of bed and you're like, oh, I can't wait to go and do 10 6-minute intervals today on my bike, or I can't wait to sit down and really figure out how I'm going to put this presentation together. But actually, when you just go, okay, I think you asked a question earlier about when the right time to do something is, or that it was a different context. But the whole procrastination topic, I find an interesting one, because if I can tell, and I think if people work with it enough, you can tell when you're really procrastinating because you're being lazy, or you can't face something, or when actually you've just not quite figured something out yet. You've not quite got aligned so that you can go in and do this thing easily with flow. So there's something about that. And so now with a work piece, if I'm struggling with it, I might leave it for a few days and I just ask the question, what do I need? What extra information might help me just get really lined up with that? And then suddenly you find it and you go, okay, now it's time to go in and do it, and put the time in, sit down, get that thing done. Anyway, I waffle.
Just with that, I think when you're err on the side of action, there's always this kind of fear of not moving, or this kind of anxiety of not doing something or just moving into it. But I think over time, you're right, you develop this kind of intuitive process as to when you need space. And I think when you develop that level of confidence in yourself that you are a doer, and you know that you are a doer, and you have that faith and trust in yourself, you kind of know that it's not procrastination when you'll know, and it's subtle. I'm with you. Like, I think you kind of know when you're not properly aligned versus you're just kind of taking the piss. And I think the good thing about being a doer and an action orientated person, you can generally have the confidence in yourself that you're probably not aligned. Do you know what I mean? As an impulsive person, if you're kind of holding off on something, you're like, oh, okay, well, it's generally you kind of, you know, I've got an event that I'm trying to nail in January, and it's going to require a massive toll on my body. And I've got these babies, and I've got these kind of business commitments, and I've got some other stuff going on. And there's something just holding me back from fully committing to the process of this physical event. And it's not procrastination, and it's not, I need to be more gritty. There's a real understanding that things may not be properly aligned. Now, a few years ago, I would be getting frustrated with myself. Just got to double down on everything, you know what I mean? But I think as you get older, you may get wiser. Just realize that.
Well, I bet it's one of the nice side effects of age, I think. But I think you know, clients that I work with in a coaching, I think that process of self-trust is a big one for people, and just starting to trust that you will get things done and they will happen. You don't have to kick your own backside all the time or berate yourself for not doing something. It's just like getting that balance between knowing what's when to push and when to not. I talk about the hand of sand. If you have a handful of sand, this was one of the best analogies for me in the racing context. If you grip it too tight, all the sand runs away. And if you don't hold it enough, then the sand runs away as well. So it's just like, how do you hold something with just the right level of intention without squeezing and pressuring too hard, but also without letting go of it? And I think if we can just do that, then usually the right pathway appears.
Oh, that's brilliant. We're gonna leave it there. We're gonna give our audience that to ponder, and that's you know, that is aligned with the topic of curiosity. One of the things that we've been talking about today. But as we land this plane, I really want to thank you for coming on the show, Karen. It's been really a pleasure. And I would like to ask you, where can our audience find and learn more about you?
I have a website and I do write blogs on there. I'm not great on my social media, but I do have Facebook, Instagram. I'm at Handbike Darke. My website is Karen Darke, DARKE.com. But I'm not very interactive there or particularly good at posting, but I do put things up sometimes. But yeah, my website's the main place. I try and keep that up to date and write blogs there occasionally.
All right, Karen, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you. Thanks.